just going to start off with some kind of introductory remarks, so talk a bit more about the panel's expertise. Nus, would you like to start us off?
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going first because I do have to leave in half an hour because my Secretary of State is going to be on the main floor. We need to go out and be super supportive, so forgive me if I don't hear what the rest of the panellists say. My name is Nusrat Ghani. I'm a minister in BEIS. This brief doesn't naturally fall in my portfolio, but actually the work of social enterprises matters to me a huge amount. I'm not sure how you came into Birmingham, into the event, but if any of you drove past the airport to get into here, you would have come through an area called Small Heath, which is half an hour away from here, and it's incredibly deprived, and that's where I grew up. In a council home where many people that we were surrounded by had been unemployed for many generations, but I was surrounded by wonderful women who had fantastic ideas but didn't have the confidence, the skill, or any access to money to grow their ideas into a fulfilling business. Women that were sewing clothes for us, women that were cooking foods, women that were trying to set up little enterprises, but there was no access to money. So for me, social enterprise is most definitely one of the answers in levelling up. Right here in Digbeth, we have the most, I believe, social enterprises in the country. I'm talking to another Midland there. It's true, isn't it? We have 50 just where we are right here. So Birmingham understands how important this is. I'm hoping it's because of my experience, which is we cannot always solve poverty with the schemes that we've had in place previously, and we cannot always solve poverty with handouts. And I'm saying that as someone that was raised on welfare. And one way we can solve poverty is basically making women more economically independent. And we know that social enterprise projects in countries overseas, we know that they work. And the fact that we're having the debate, do they work here, is slightly absurd. So they work, they have to be in the levelling up agenda. I'm hoping they'll be a part of the new investment zones, which is not just about companies, it's also about how we make sure there's a nice mix of skills, education, and enabling people that are involved in social enterprises to extend the work that they're doing. The other beauty about social enterprises, they keep people in their home, in their community. People like me, when we do okay, we move on, don't we? We move out. And we can't then mentor and encourage other people to either stick within education or take some risks and take their first job or let alone set up their first business. So I always think the beauty of social enterprises keeps people secure and close to their place, or that place that we're trying to level up a little bit. So it creates wealth there too. One of the questions we were asked to look at was the UK Dormant Asset Scheme, which is £738 million, I believe, for projects for young people, for financial inclusion and social investment. I would just argue that's most definitely the case. We need to make sure that money is spent well and spent fast. We don't spend years of bureaucracy getting that money out. And I hope there's a focus on helping women and young people in particular. I'm not sure what more to add. I know the people that I grew up with that weren't able to go on to university or weren't able to break out of the social welfare trap may have different life chances if they had access to money or a mentor who could extend their business and employ them. And now the young people Wilden in East Sussex, it's very different where I grew up in the Midlands. We have fewer than 1,000 people unemployed in my constituency. I think there are around 500 people unemployed in the estate that I grew up in Birmingham, so it's a major difference. But we do have some really good social enterprise projects, and one is a community cafe in Howsham, which gets young people with learning difficulties into work and provides them their first experience of a job so they can apply for other jobs afterwards. And as a Member of Parliament, we are able to employ people too. And one of the things that I was able to do after a very distressing piece of casework, a father came in and talked about his son's learning difficulties, but he was really keen to work in a garage. But they wouldn't employ him until they could see that he was able to hold down a job. So I employed that young man for a short while, and he came and worked for me, and just having that reference enabled him to have his job. And I thought that's what social enterprise can do. People who understand the concerns of their local people can give people their first job and also make them feel a little bit independent. You can hopefully help them get onto the next ladder, whether it's a job or expanding their business. So I'm incredibly supportive. Most definitely a part of levelling up. I'm hoping it's going to be a part of the investment zones, and I just want that money out the door into the community as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much. In terms of who gets next, Stephen, do you want to tell us a bit more about the work that you do, and also anything that kind of from kind of governmental side, kind of what you would like to see coming out of these things that you get.
And thank you for a fantastic opening to really sort of set the scene for what we're trying to do with this session today, so I'm really, really grateful to you for that. So I'm Steve Muers, I'm the CEO of BEIS Capital, and our mission is to grow the market for investing in the social impact into social organisations in the UK. And when I was thinking about my remarks for the session today, I was thinking, well, we've had a lot of sessions, a lot of panels over the years of discussing the potential of community enterprise, social enterprise, investment to support that. And it feels it's been a long journey. But I think there's three reasons I want to outline today about why it's now different, why we now have a bigger opportunity to really shift the dial and take this to another scale and to another level. The first of those big opportunities is there are now real examples of this happening and working at significant scale. And there's thousands of those all over the country, but because we're here in Birmingham, because I grew up in the Midlands, I'm going to give a couple of Midlands examples just to sort of bring this to life for people and illustrate what is already being achieved by social enterprises using investment to grow their impact. So one is the fantastic organisation P3, which many of you from this part of the world may well know about. They provide a huge range of services for some of the most vulnerable in society. And they use investment to purchase property they can then use to house people who otherwise many would be homeless, often people coming out of prison, provide support and long-term stable housing backed by investment that's enabled to scale up the number of people they reach across the West Midlands to support in that way. Very successful model and is also being replicated by other organisations across the country. Another good example from this part of the world is the Black Country Reinvestment Society, which is one of the community development finance lenders, one of the most successful ones based here in the Black Country, and they're providing lending, particularly sort of micro loans, often people trying to start micro businesses who, for whatever reason, would be excluded from mainstream finance, from the mainstream banking system, mainstream sources of credit, perhaps because of tricky things in their background or past. And BCRS and organisations like that are stepping into that void as a sort of non-profit, socially motivated lender, helping people start businesses and make levelling up come to life in the community where they live and want to develop enterprise and develop jobs. So there's real examples of this happening at scale, and we can take that further. The second big opportunity, and the reason things are changing, is that there is more appetite now from various owners of assets to actually invest money into social organisations, social enterprises, and social mission. There's several categories of this, just to illustrate a few. So, charitable foundations in the UK have, depending on exactly how you count it, 60, 70, 80 billion assets owned by charitable organisations. Now, a lot of that tradition has just been invested in equity markets, bond markets, and then the returns being given out in grants. But more and more we're seeing charitable organisations that are saying, okay, I've got this large amount of assets, let's actually invest some of it in organisations that are making a difference here in the UK in line with our charitable mission, while also generating returns then used again in the future. Examples of organisations that have been very progressive around this, so the guys in St Thomas's charity, very large foundation, NHS foundation in London, saying they're going to use 10% of their assets to invest purely for impact. Church of England is leading the way in this area as well, sort of carved out part of their very considerable endowment to invest into social mission projects, social enterprises, and so on. I think there's a lot further we can go there. The Levelling Up White Paper had a great initiative around encouraging local government pension schemes to invest up to 5% of their assets in local social impact and social initiatives. Now, 5% isn't a very big number. When you realise the total local government pension scheme pot is something like 350 billion, then 5% becomes rather interesting. And you can create a lot of great social impact, support a lot of social enterprises with that kind of money. And there's some local pension schemes, I'd call out Merseyside, Greater Manchester, East Yorkshire, already looking at this and making this a reality. And finally, actually, the public sector. There's bits of the government which are thinking about how they can use money more imaginatively, not just giving out grants, actually using money to create investment opportunities, make some of that public sector grant be payable to support enterprise models. So the Department of Levelling Up have done this recently, as have Sports England and others. And there's a great potential for the public sector to use money more imaginatively. It's not about spending more money, but taking money the public sector is spending already and using it a different way in an investment mindset rather than simply a grant mindset to support social enterprises that are making a difference across the country. And the final big opportunity, actually, we got a sort of sneak preview of in the last contribution, which is around dormant assets. So a lot of the growth we've seen in the social investment world and social investment market has come from using the previous set of dormant bank accounts, part of which was used to set up BEIS Society Capital. And we've taken 425 million that we were given in the initial phase of that. However, we've now made 850 million investments off the back of that. And with the other investment we've levered in through the way we've used that money, that equates to 2.5 billion that has now reached thousands of organisations, charities, social enterprises and others across the country. We've now got a really big opportunity for the next wave of dormant assets that's coming down the track to build on that success, make social investment available to more organisations and more communities. But again, the crucial thing to do that with that investment mindset, how can we use the money in a way that's sustainable and then recycled, can be used again and help support more organisations, more social entrepreneurs and more innovation in the future. So I'm very excited about that. The Community Enterprise Growth Plan is supported by us, the other organisation, which is the plan, how we're going to do that, how we're going to take those assets and support social enterprise at a new and bigger scale going forward. So I'll wrap up there.
Brilliant, thank you. Kevin, do you want to come finish that?
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Davies, and I am still a social entrepreneur. I'm based in God's own country, the Black Country, which is the big brother of Birmingham, I would say, the heart of the industrial revolution. And in part, I'm seeking another revolution to the social enterprise growth and development, because I think the key to this whole debate about, I assume we're still using the term levelling up, Minister. We are. In the Black Country, we use the term, yes, levelling up, but the economy together, and you might hear that a few times from me. I was just sort of making some of my notes for today's session. Hand up, not a handout. I don't necessarily want to be caught up in the semantics. We live in challenging times at the moment, and whatever we need to do to work together, the synergies we need to create through our collaboration to try and help lift people out of poverty is what I'm interested in. It's what's motivated me over the last 25 years as an entrepreneur in education, employment and community empowerment. That sort of win-win approach where we can get sectors from the civil society, public and the private work together has been critical to our journey story, particularly in Warsaw where I hailed from originally, and how we can sort of lift people out of those challenges. And I suppose the Economy Together's first application for us was in my own sort of social investment journey. In part when I did the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Programme about 10 years ago. I was one of the few social entrepreneurs that was involved in that. And what we were trying to do was scale up what we had at the time was our own independent alternative provision unit. I think we were only working with 80 students at the time. But what I recognised was the challenges that those young people presenting to us was life at home stinks, education wasn't working for us, and we can't get jobs. And the little good we were doing in that little part of the area was great in terms of sort of sticking plaster stuff, but the system we felt needed changing, particularly around Warsaw where education outcomes weren't great. So one of the things we wanted to do, particularly around innovation in our area, was try to regenerate some of the local retail units and find a new place for our education school at times in the independent sector. But I needed finance to do it. And, you know, me being the sort of plucky, cheeky entrepreneur knocking on people's door asking for cash wasn't enough, even though it produced some outcomes, and we needed to have some greater degree of credibility. And going on the Goldman's course, I suppose, gave people some ability to go past the initial frustration or suspicion about what we were talking about. Anyway, I needed in the end £3 million. And we didn't have it down the back of the soap. What we did have was a credible business plan that was developed by a growth plan. And I suppose we were one of the early recipients of what was now probably called blended finance. And we managed to secure about 1.7 million of that through a combination of what was Future Builders and the Community Builders Fund. And we built our Goldmine Centre, which was a community hub, which housed some education activities, some social entrepreneurs, all working together in a sort of collaborative space. But what I recognise is what the education unit we had in the independent sector, as I said, was just a microcosm of what's happening across the Black Country. And we wanted to affect the mainstream. And to do that, I think it was when the free school programme was just early new, and we built, in the end, we were successful in creating the Warsaw Studio School. And what I had to do at the time, because we're in the independent sector, I needed a partner to be part of that journey with us. And we approached our local grammar school, who at the time were being encouraged to spread their grammar school glory to others. And the curiosity of an AP provider and a grammar school working together sort of convinced the DFE there was something in this. And the studio school was important to me because it was about vocational learning, but also about producing job creation. and getting people ready for that next marketplace opportunity for them. That was important for me, particularly working in that area. And in the end, I suppose the Goldman Centre was that catalyst to develop what's going to happen November this year, in the next few months or so. We're opening up the St Matthew's Education Quarter, which 10 years later is a £13 million development, bringing together education, social enterprises, community, all working in an area to try and, for a better term, level up a part of the town centre which has been in decline. And we've been successful in getting a bit of the Towns Deal funds to create a digital hub that will be the next part of our jigsaw puzzle. And for me, it's about demonstrating what it could look like. We can talk about leveling up, but we need demonstrators. And for us, lots of challenges in the Black Country area, lots of challenges in the Walsall area. And but there's opportunity, and there are people who look like me, who have got ambition, but need that opportunity for someone to believe in them. And my role on the Black Country Local Enterprise Project, which I think Minister has had some overlap with your department, and obviously they're being phased out at the moment, and the combined authorities are taking on that remit. And the Economy Together, which our local enterprise partnership have adopted, got the 4 local authority leaders to sign up to this principle that post-pandemic, cost of living crisis, we need to do something about levelling up our area and using education, enterprise, and critically health as a cross-cutting theme to try and see how we can deal with the determinants of health inequalities. That's important for me and important for our area. Today, my trust has 9 secondary schools. That's what social investment did for us. We managed to grow. Mercy and Trust has an eclectic mix of AP, alternative provision, studio school, yes, it's still going, and a number of comprehensives. We are 10,000 students, £65 million turnover. That is part of the journey, what is the art of the possible if people believe in what you're doing and you can get credible investment into what you're doing. And part of me, I hope for this journey going forward, is about how we can level up through recognising the potential and opportunity from our organisations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And would you like to kick us off and pick on a few points?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just re-explain why we're all here, actually. The Centre for Social Justice I set up back after I ceased being leader. It was based on what I had looked at as I went around the country. Particularly, I spent a lot of time up in Glasgow, looking at Easter House. Remember, Easter House was an estate. It was meant to be the modern build that took everybody out of the Gorbals in Glasgow and positioned them as on a Greenhill site. It's called Easter House, and the problem that they faced was, of course, the planners at those days, who used to plan for everybody and do everybody and wait for them to be happy in receipt of that, didn't actually build any routes back into Glasgow, such as bus routes or any other routes at all. So they had this new complex outside of Glasgow, in what we now call East Glasgow. But there was no way you could go get a job because you didn't have any transport capabilities, so you sat there without a job but with a new flat. Rapidly that became trash. There was a small shopping centre they set up, but nobody had really much money, so it became a cheap shopping centre. And of course drugs took over in the estate. At the time I visited it back in 2002-03, it was completely run down. When you went round, you'd find the detritus of drug dealers lying underneath the stairwells. The most remarkable thing I remember seeing when I was there going round was that some child had obviously been playing down in the stairwell. The teddy bear was there was a pillow there, and right beside it was a discarded syringe and needles. That was life in Easter House. That's what happens when you rely wholly on the state, and the state tells you what they're going to do, the Corporation of Glasgow in this particular case, and you look to them for everything in your life, and it's not healthy to the human beings. And somebody said, you know, the problem is the buildings then get to look like the people in their destroyed lives, and that was the biggest moment that I wanted to change it. So the Centre for Social Justice was set up on the back of social change. It's about giving people the wherewithal, helping them, remedial work to get them up so they can take the challenges, can move into work, can get the skilling, but get their lives settled. You know, the 5 pathways for the CSJ were debt, dependency, family breakdown, failed education, and worklessness. And all of them feed off each other, such that you end up, if you have a few of those, almost certainly unlikely to end up in any gainful employment, not bringing anything in. There are plenty of families there who love their kids, but they were completely addicted. I used to find kids that went to the local Methodist church for breakfast. 2 kids that they used to talk to me about that had turned up, one older child of 7 and the other one of about 5. And they came there eventually. And the reason they came there was because their parents were so badly drug addicted, there was never any food in their house. It's not that they were poor in terms of money, it's that their lifestyle made them poor and made the children poor, so the children had to come somewhere else to get fed. So this was the after effects of what happens when you just think that you can run people's lives through them. And so that's what the CSJ was all about, to work with small community groups and charities to learn what they do on the ground to put things right and try and get government to understand that better. And one of those areas, by the way, was in social impact bonds. And we've worked, I know, with Big Society Capital for a long time, going right back to the origin of this. And when I was in government, we actually advanced the whole case for social impact bonds on the basis of 2 things. First of all, A, it opens up a whole area of money that local authorities can tap into to actually deliver change in communities. But it also gives a discipline to this, which government never can do, which is private sector discipline to how money is spent and is checked so that it actually delivers results of change that then are set against the bond, are absolutely vital. That discipline alone is worth it. The second bit of it, therefore, is opening up a wider range of capital. And the third area is that it's, use my old phrase, was it brings the city to the inner city and starts to tell them about what's really going on in lives that are a million miles away from them in every respect. So we started on that. We did a lot of work on that. In fact, when I was at DWP, I found, down the back of the sofa, there were big sofas in those days. I got rid of them all in the end. But the point is that I found 20 million quid, literally in 2 days, by small little bits from the budget, which we then put into starting to kickstart some of these social investment bonds and testing to see how they work. And a lot of that underlies quite a lot of what we're doing at the moment. We wanted to do much more, much bigger, but the government went off in a slightly different direction, and we never quite got to that point. But we were the leaders of this around the world. It was this country that was leading on that, and sadly we let that slip back a bit. So there is a huge point in all of this. And the point I just want to make, picking up on some of these, I don't like the term levelling up, by the way. Let me just be honest about that. I hate all these phrases that are used by governments to define where they are. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't work at all. Social justice is what works for me because that's what we are about. We're about delivering social justice to people who have not had it and to give them the opportunity to change their lives, not necessarily change them for them, to get them out through that, doing some of the stuff through social enterprises, but also the benefit system that I changed under universal credit to give people a pathway out that made it much more advantageous to be moving up the scale back into full employment. There's one bit the government hasn't implemented. I've been on about it for ages. Alongside universal credit was meant to go universal support. Now that package, because universal credit was never just a benefit system, the way I designed it was that what you discover through universal credit is exactly what's happening to people's lives. So you discover how badly off they are, what the difficulties are, whether they're drug addicts, whether they have debt problems. You pick that all up in universal credit. So the job centres become possessors of the richest source of information about the reasons why people are in trouble. What we wanted to do was stick universal support alongside, which meant as soon as you discover someone is not capable of going into work at that stage because they're suffering all sorts of different problems, you move them over to the charitable, voluntary, etc., to help put them right. Debt counselling, debt support, drug help to get them off drugs, rehabilitation, and so forth. So you can put them back into the system again so they can actually start looking for work. This is very important, and I will want the government to implement this strategy because it's not complete yet, and it should have been, only I resigned at the time and couldn't get it done. And there are a couple of other thoughts about this, which I just want to complete on. The CSJ right now is itself, in a way, an enterprise. Because what we now do is, unlike most of the think tanks in London, many policies are often conjured up on the back of an envelope amongst people that have never actually witnessed or been to a place where there's difficulty. We want that out on the ground, coming up, not down. And so we've opened up a whole series of regional offices now. We have a West Midlands office, we have a Northwest office in Manchester, we're opening up one in the Northeast, and we're intending to open up one in Scotland as well, because we want to hear from all of those. We have over 600 to 700 small community groups, charities and enterprises as part now of the Poverty Fighters Alliance. So the CSJ is at the heart of all of this, which is why you're here today. I want to give you one very good example of why we can do this. John Roberts, who runs and owns AO, hugely successful business, beats all the white goods company at their own game by selling their own goods at a better rate and doing a better service for it, which is a remarkable feature in itself. He's one of those business leaders that has a good social conscience. And so, apart from a number of things he does to help people with lower incomes actually be able to buy these machines at much cheaper rates, he decided that he wanted to get the young kids off the streets. So he set up a youth club called the Onside Centre. Now, the Onside Centre that he set up originally was based on the Bolton Boys Club, which has been around for about 150 years. And what it does is it has all the facilities and sports things that you'd want to have. You know, they've got five-a-side football pitches, climbing ranges, basketball courts, they've got table tennis, but they've also got dance studios, they've got music, they've got special areas where you can take kids to deal with them. All of them bring in charities, local charities, boxing gyms, all of these things they bring in, and they also bring in the education. They get over 9,000, at least 9,000 kids in their youth centres. Antisocial behaviour, once they set up a centre in that area, and there are now 18 of them, I think, falls by up to 70%. And that's because the kids have got a safe space to go to. You can't come in there if you're not a member, and you have to pay to be a member. It's £1. But he works on the principle quite rightly that what you don't pay for, you don't respect. So the kids all want to keep the place clean. There's never been a problem in those centres. They've never been trashed. There's never been a fight in them. They're properly staffed and properly looked after. There should be one of these in every single area. And what's different about the financing is the local government puts up some of the capital. He arranges that all the local private sector, put up the other capital for it. And the running costs are shared between the two of them. So all the private companies in the area now help invest in those centres, and not one of them has closed as a result. Because local authorities can't do what they do time and time again, put money into something, 2 years down the road, pull it, because their own budget problems mean that that one can go off the marker and nobody really cares. So this is a commitment for both sides that lasts a lifetime, against no matter what the political persuasion of that group is. If you pull out of that, like a bond, then you better pay these guys back, because they're going to lose their investment, and that makes the local authority think twice about it and makes them committed. So I would recommend, if you get a chance, to go and visit any of the on-site centres. They are breathtaking, and I think I've seen lots of things in my life, but I've never seen something that visualises success and change for kids that come from difficult backgrounds. Imagine during the summer that lone parents who had to work, as many had to do, by the way, during the lockdown, which was an unmitigated disaster for many of the poorest families in this country, but that notwithstanding, I'm going to open up another argument. Their kids can go there during the day, they have all the support they need, and they're safe. What difference does that make to that parent struggling? It means they have peace of mind, and they can organise their day instead of worrying all day long about what their kid's doing on the street where the gangs come. The gangs fall in those areas because they can't get the kids to do their work for them, because the kids have got an alternative. So all of this we're talking about today, or all the way you can get new finance, it's already happening. It's in a street near you. What we need to do is tell the government, this is what that phrase levelling up really means. I don't like it, but if they want to use it, make it real, because there's lots of ways they can do it. And one of the ways we could do it just straight away is for government to make sure that they incentivise and support, so we have one of those youth centres in every single difficult area in the country. Change of the game.
Thank you, everyone. I think just kind of start us off with kind of a quick kind of topic to discuss. I think every single one of you has touched on children and education and young people. In terms of kind of the specific things that the government needs to kind of facilitate from
I don't want to leave.
That's absolutely fine.
So give me. Let me take away as much as I can.
Yeah.
There's 5 minutes that you want me to take away. I mean, you've got Iain as well, championing what government needs to do, and everyone listens to Iain otherwise. It's just
No,
not
you're the
work.
government minister.
I know. Iain and I were sanctioned together by China. We spent a lot of time together, but I don't want to leave without what I need to hear, especially, I mean, Kevin, we didn't get to spend enough time together earlier on. So I'm so sorry, Mason, to interrupt you.
That's absolutely fine.
5 minutes of what you need me to take away. I took on board everything that you said. You know, Birmingham versus the Black Country. I think we know what's not the country. But what do I need to take away in the 5 minutes that I'm here before you carry on having this discussion?
I think your influence over the transition of local enterprise partnerships into the combined authority is really significant. I think making sure that we don't lose the distinctiveness of sub-regions of whether it's West Midlands or wherever else is important, because localism, in the true sense of the word, local people know what they want rather than some reason. Why do you think that that's important? I think the overlap of investment zones with education, priority areas, we've got lots of place-based activity, but I question whether they are as joined up as they could be. I think if BEIS has a voice in that, then I think we should look at how that could look.
That's it. So two things. One is looking across government, probably in your department, but elsewhere, where there's existing pots of money that could be used in a different way to enable more delivery by social enterprises and charities. And Iain's given some examples of the stuff he did when he did DWP. So this is not spending more money, take the money the government's already spending and just use it more intelligently, focused around outcomes, not inputs, and the way it enables the social sector to deliver. And as I say, lots and lots of examples, and I'm happy to share more of those with you. And then the other point is, the one you referred back to earlier about using the future set of dormant assets in a way that is delivered fast, as you say, and particularly supports enterprise and investment and is sustainable, not just some grants that go on something great and then it's forgotten forever and doesn't build something long term.
Can I throw a question back, because all of you are experts in this area? I have a huge anxiety we're still not getting to the hard to reach women, especially women that I used to represent, hopefully one I did represent in a community such as Small Heath. They aren't aware of this, they won't have the skills to even access this, let alone have the network. Many of them don't even leave their very small communities that they grew up in and have their families in. Why aren't we hearing more about social enterprise projects that get hold of working class white women or working class Muslim women?
I'll give you two examples in the Black Country. Sweden, which works with predominantly Asian women, and Iain Asian Women's Group. Both of them have been going for probably 15 years, working, supporting ladies from those communities. I think one of the things which they flagged to me in my LEP role as a non-exec on the economic inclusion area is around what's happening post-European money, because that's been supported. So the Shared Prosperity Fund, we need some clarity on where that's going and happening very quickly, because some of their funds will end I think March next year. So some clarity on that. Please.
It's funny, Rich, literally before we started, I was just chatting to Mason about an example, so on the sort of more the white working class community. So in the whole Women's Network has taken social investment and has been very successful to expand, again, availability of properties and accommodation. They particularly work supporting women fleeing domestic abuse situations that are often very vulnerable, very, very difficult. And they've been able to use investment to build a portfolio. Basically, they bought rundown houses, redid them, and used them as a way of housing women who need somewhere safe to be away from a violent partner. And it's been great success. They're a fantastic organisation based in one of the top Swiss of Hull.
We'll look all of those three up. Mason, good permission, am I allowed to carry on the discussion? Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you. So I think in terms of just kind of throwing into a slightly more general discussion, the thing that kind of keeps coming back again and again in everything that you guys have brought up has been around children, young people, and the idea of firstly kind of lifting people out of poverty, out of drug addiction, out of any struggles that they're having. But also there's the question about making sure that people kind of stay in the area if they want to. If they want to keep those, if they want to make the most of the opportunities that they have where they live. Because I think one of the kind of enduring things that what was called levelling up in the previous administration still is to a certain extent. There's the idea of making sure that if somebody's growing up in a low-income area, that they don't feel that they need to go somewhere else in order to make it, whether that's a bigger city or London, and part of that is to do with the opportunity that they're given. What more do you think needs to be done, or what kind of projects need to be perhaps funded better or be given more time of day in order to make sure that if you've got bright young people growing up in low-income areas, they've got the ability to stay there and make the most of their life there rather than get anyone out to London and try to find their life there. Do anyone want to start? Or?
Yeah, let me just chip in on this one, and the others will come in. The number one issue that we face, we did a report on this at the Centre for Social Justice, actually at the back 2016-2017, and we asked what does the picture in the UK look like right now? In other words, what is our major problem? And we always hear, by the way, that our biggest problem is productivity. So we did a proper report to look at this, what is the issue around productivity, and then what can government do, if government can do anything at all, to help ensure that there are ways to change that. The first thing we discovered, we recommended the way in which productivity is measured, by the way, is completely out of date, because it really only works if you make things, widgets and stuff you can count. It's very bad on service sector. It's very difficult to figure out. It also, countries put in completely different things. So, for example, the French take out health and education from their productivity figures. Well, they're the biggest bringers down of productivity. So when we'd done this, we came to the final conclusion of this was number one, which is the important point, that actually London and the South East have the highest productivity in Europe, but the rest of the UK doesn't meet the average for the UK. So now you get the picture of where we are. Our problem is we are London-centric, but there are parts of London that are the poorest in the UK as well at the same time. So there's massive imbalance already built into the one area that's got high productivity. So the answer really is, it's not just a matter of productivity, it's a matter of what happens underneath the very, very high earners, what's actually building down there in skills and understanding. And so the thing we're really bad at here in the UK is finding ways to give people new skills. A lot of people want to move their jobs, find dead-end jobs, or they find themselves unemployed. We are very bad at picking them up and giving them new opportunities, skilling and training. So first thing we recommended was the government's got to make the way for enterprises to work, that they've got to have the ability to be able to train people. FE colleges, for example, have had no money now for so long on different governments. It's very difficult to promote apprenticeships when apprenticeships can't use the FE colleges because the FE colleges can't afford to bring in the right sort of level of people. So training and skilling are really critical, and communications. Those things are important because you could move all your businesses to Leeds or to wherever in the north, providing your communication links are good and your access to trained and retrained people is also very good. And that's where the fall down is hugely in the UK. So giving people greater skilling and that communication thing is a way of actually rediscovering whole areas of the United Kingdom, which are at the moment in decline because there's nothing to bring people or businesses to there. And that's the really critical bit. And I'm critical of building railways up and down to Manchester, when I think actually what you need to do is to build up the north to actually be a competitor to London and to have all those facilities. So wherever we go, the social enterprises are trying to bring new skills and trying to bring new training, but the government needs to find ways to make that much easier. That'd be my first statement about this. So skilling and training and retraining, absolutely critical.
Yeah, I'd agree, being someone who's overseeing education. I mean, we've got an eclectic mix of schools, I said, from the selective grammar schools to the vocational to the comprehensives. And part of the choice of making such a trust as it's constituted was not having a sort of one-size-fits-all for our students. I'm a big believer in apprenticeships. This morning I was judging the Ladder Apprenticeship Awards for the Birmingham branch. And we inherited that campaign, the Ladder campaign, from London. It was called the Ladder for London, the Evening Standard newspaper promoting it. And part of it was about trying to create, you may have heard this phrase before, the ladder of opportunity, which Robert Halford talks about. And we worked with Robert on championing that in our localities. But for me, it is about making sure that we find the right tracks for our young people and matching them with the employers, so increasing those conversations. I sit on the regional board for Business and Community, His Majesty's Social Responsibility Charity, Business Responsibility Charity. And getting industry leaders to come into localities to see what is the art of the possible has been part of that journey. And that's certainly sort of the catalyst for some of our activity. But, we can, the railways, great, I won't make a big commentary on it, but we do need businesses to co-locate. We've had Mark Levin got moved into Wolverhampton recently. Wolverhampton is the capital of youth unemployment for the country. I don't know if you knew that stat. And so they have a big focus about making sure that the jobs are available, and there are lots of vacancies, but they don't match the skills to the local population. And we need to address that, absolutely.
I agree with everything that's been said on skills, so I won't repeat that. I guess two other elements just to sort of chuck in here. One is that the record of social enterprise on creating good jobs in areas where the other businesses are less good at that is very, very strong. So actually creating employment opportunity, creating opportunity in the parts of the country where people might want to stay, but over the past often have had to move is excellent. So we looked at where all the sort of social investment deals across the country have happened, and 43% of them are in the areas that the government's called levelling up priority one. It is sort of way out of line with what you get from sort of commercial investment from banks. And I mentioned an example earlier of the Black Country Reinvestment Society, and them and the sort of peer organisations around the country, the non-profit business lenders, the CDFIs, their record of investing disproportionately in very marginalised neighbourhoods, actually women-led, ethnic minority-led businesses, back to the point earlier, compared to, if you look at what mainstream finance does, is very, very impressive. So that is definitely a tool for creating jobs and opportunities in areas where sometimes we're missing. The other bit I should just mention briefly is housing. Lots of people's choices about where they live across the country in all sorts of different ways are enormously constrained by our, frankly, dysfunctional housing system, where there's a long history of investment in the wrong kinds in the wrong places, and serious moves to increase the supply of affordable housing in the right parts of where it's needed is probably the heart of anything that really changes the kind of spatial economic disparities in the UK.
We have absolutely smashed through the time. I'm going to do one very quick point, just to wrap through each one of you. If you've got one priority from the upcoming investment zones that the government's proposing, blank check. One little change to either the tax system for businesses, anything in terms of investment, anything in terms of one small bit of policy that really means that community enterprises can properly do the work that you think that they're capable of. What would that be? Results.
Back in 2010, maybe it was 2009, I was sitting in front of that investment committee to get that £3 million out of the back of the sofa. And the person chairing the committee was someone called Harry Baldwin, who some of you might be familiar with. And I remember reading a paper that Harry had co-authored called Social Enterprise Zone. I think Cameron and Prime Minister had talked about it at the time. And I wanted to lobby, and I did in the end, then local enterprise policy, when the Chancellor was talking about these enterprise zones proper, that there could be those locations where social enterprise could benefit specifically from all the benefits of those particular enterprise zones. And they never formally got adopted, but I still think there was energy in that idea of where we've got clusters of activity that we can magnify and scale them up, which would mean getting the right investment to them, about co-locating services and resources and giving people that opportunity to provide the support for them. So for me, I think it's not a new idea. The investment zones, the enterprise zones, the education priority areas, we just need a bit more locking people in the room and just doing a bit more overlap so we can see what the win-win is. They have good examples of what it could look like. I say you can come to the Black Country, come to Birmingham, come to Digbeth. I think if we can do a bit of that, then great. Tax benefits, fantastic. If we can talk planning, all those things that we had challenges when we tried to set up our own schools, there were things which could be overcomable. I think if we can do that, I think that would be a good start for the test.
I picked up the tax theme. So back actually, I think when Iain was in government, I know he was a supporter of this. So the government introduced, I think it was the world's first tax relief for social investment. And it was then when PwC did a sort of audit of tax reliefs across Europe. This was regarded as one of the top 2 or 3 of like every tax relief in every country in Europe. Sadly, the government sort of lost interest in it a bit recently. I think given the sort of rhetoric and interest the government has in re-looking at tax and its role in growth, I think there's an opportunity to take that sort of idea, that world-leading idea from a Conservative government, and say, actually, we could supercharge this, do something bigger, more dramatic, make more social enterprises, more claims of social investment eligible, perhaps make it more generous in these zones, and something to take something that was a good idea that none of this government had and sort of started and was a good thing, has got a bit left behind, actually done it up in these areas to really make social enterprise at the heart of enterprise and these things.
Actually, you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I would. We argued at length for that, and Oliver Letwin was a good colleague on this, and he was in government, and we together managed to finally persuade a very sceptical chancellor that this was worthwhile. So getting a bit of tax relief was a major breakthrough. Second thing I would say when it comes to support in that way that grows enterprises at work, social enterprises, etc. Through the impact bond process is to scale up too. That's the other thing. So before I left, and Oliver went, we were planning for a big test city investment bond process. Let us say we were going to take a town like Manchester, something like Manchester, and literally shift the focus of finance so that we can get investment, a huge amount coming in on a balanced bond basis. To basically get huge change in the community that would end up with enterprises like the you're talking about at the moment, on a city scale to test this, whether this was feasible. One of the arguments I made to local government was they spend their whole time going cap in hand to government, asking for more money. Governments come, governments go, budgets change. They don't have that long-term investment view that businesses manage, because they're all set. You're going to pull out of a bond at some stage, you're going to owe somebody money. This doesn't happen with government and local government. So we held a conference with local government to say you should really shift a chunk of your spending over to the bond side that therefore secures that spending on a much more reasonable basis in areas where you're trying to change lives, and that's the key bit. So I would certainly want to do that now. I want the government not just to do the tax relief, but actually to recognise now we need now to take a pace ahead of everybody else and say, we're going to see how big this could be and what would happen if we did this over a period, and we would underwrite the government a great deal of that so that people could understand, incentivise them by increasing the tax return on that, which would be very helpful. The other thing I would do is a single thing. I'm sorry to bang on about it, but the government has a fund at the moment which would help leverage things like the on-side youth academies, and I would take them as a really good example in this bit. And I would say there should be one being built over the next 4 or 5 years all over parts of Britain where there have been difficulties, lower incomes, some poverty. These are absolutely magical in transforming young kids' lives and their view of it, and then the enterprises that work around them and in these centres could help also transform the next phase of their lives. They perform better at school, they cause less trouble in school once these things are there. It's quite remarkable. And if we've got something that works, it's the old rule, if it works and you have a plan for it, then that's where you invest, because you know how that works. And I would do that tomorrow. I would say roll it out, roll it out, roll it out, and the other stuff that we were talking about as well at the same time. But there's your really good example of what funding from private and public sector that actually lasts does for changing lives, and that's really the best example. If you ever get a chance, by the way, to go and see it, you won't be allowed in, so you have to go because you're too old. But I do recognise if you can book it, go and have a look. It changes your view on life at all.
Excellent. I think we're going to open things up to questions. If anyone has any questions.
The online centre sounds on-site centre sounds amazing. We've got a leisure centre that's just closed down. But exactly that, we were thinking community cafe, national parkour centre, indoor skate park, and then other social enterprises around. The parish council, whose land it's in, totally for it, about to do their own independent study to prove it's possible. District council that owns it, cabinet, want to lock it down and build 14 houses. How can we stop that from happening? We have a window because it's now been called to the whole council and the cabinet. There's one last chance to make a difference, and that could be from there. Social Centre for Social Justice have visited, and we've had a whole day with some of your colleagues. You know, can we do a pilot? Is it a test piece? Is it possible? Can you help?
I can't give you direct advice because I have to go and have a look at it, but you can ask for it to be called in at the end of the day, is their plan. Because the question is whether or not the government, and what they're doing at the moment is they're obviously seeking just to get their capital from it. So they will flog all this stuff and they'll get the money back and that will help their budgets. So there's got to be incentives elsewhere for them to be more imaginative with the land that they use. Whereabouts was that again?
Colwell, North West Leicestershire.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand it in London where they're doing this the whole time, by the way. Any bit of property, any bit of space that comes up, they're now flogging off for building. But in your area, I thought the demand may be there, but you've got plenty of other greater scope to be able to build. If you've got a setup that's already built, you can't put it all down and not use it. Yeah, well, I'll give John Roberts a call, because you never know, he might be able to make an offer. If you link back to our team, I'll give you the details.
Yeah, hi, Peter Udell, Responsible Finance. The government, or the taxpayer, has a British development bank. Called the British Business Bank, which in theory is there to help small businesses get finance. But in reality, the amount of lending by banks to small businesses hasn't really changed over the last 10 years. Now, Big Side Capital done a great job in catalysing the CDFI sector with BCRS, who's one of our great CDFIs. But at some point, and what it's shown is that these community lenders can operate close to a commercial basis. And at some point, you would think they'd start to transition to support, perhaps if it's needed, to address some sort of market failure, to the British Business Bank. And the British Business Bank could start to take up much more of the slack. Do you think that, and unfortunately the minister perhaps responsible is not here, do you think that is a possibility, and would you encourage that?
Yes and yes. I mean, I think it would be great. She's not here at the moment, and I'm not in government, so there's a slight problem. But all of that is, you've got to start thinking differently about what is needed and how, therefore, you deliver it. And we've got still, I think, we're not unique, but the UK got this peculiar, very solid top-down approach to almost everything. That the money has to come from government, the government has to do something. In fact, what we're talking about here is bringing everybody else into the requirement and saying this is a group effort. That, we can get private companies, trusts, etc., to put money into finance, more likely that these things that you do are going to last longer, because there's just no interest in them breaking free at a short notice. They live much longer notices on these things than the government does, and that's one of the big problems, is that people still go, oh yeah, but government's got to do something. So I'm certainly very keen on that. There is money around. It's not that we're short of money. It's just how you use that money and who's actually spending it. But I do think the more we can get private sector involved in investing in these sort of projects that we're talking about, the more we start to help in societal terms as well, because we break down that divide between those that are involved in high finance and those that are stuck on estates and not able to get it. I mean, you define the state, I always say it's by all the gambling shops that you see around an area. You're very well in a poor area straight away. So you can see what happens. Being poor is more expensive than being rich. I know it sounds absurd, but everything that happens around you then becomes very difficult. You use cash, you can't go if you don't get cash machines. You can't get cash from somewhere. People won't take cash, so you're stuck straight away. All your bills come on paper, but nobody wants to give you paper unless you pay for it. So all these things about invoices and things, it just doesn't work for you. So it's much more difficult. So we've got to find ways breaking through all of that and using a variety of sources to actually get people back understanding when banks say we don't produce bank statements on paper, you have to pay for it. Just how damaging that really is. So that's all part of the process of breaking this down socially.
I think the point about private finance is really critical there. Because the art here, I mean, this is about whether forms of government support or what we try and do, it can go so far. But the big point is to develop structures that enable larger scale private capital support, much bigger scale expansion of sort of lending and sort of that your members do and that we can talk about. If you look at other countries, there is a much bigger, particularly the US, but also Germany as well, there is a bigger flow of private capital through some of these community-based, very community-sensitive kind of models. Our banking system is traditionally very centralised, very dominated by a few very large players that have, often for good reason, just found it quite difficult to do this kind of thing. So there is a big prize there of private money. If we get all the other bits of the wiring sorted, and government's hands, some should not line up in the right way.
Chris McGowan, University of Leeds. My wife was an enterprise accelerator under Cameron's Big Society scheme in York. And she had a background in corporate finance. And one of the things she was able to do was that she had lots of connections in the private sector. So this wasn't about finance, but it was actually about mentoring. She found, so she was mentoring mainly social enterprises, what I appreciate is slightly different from community enterprises, but nonetheless. And I mean, the thing is that private sector have different kinds of skills. They also have slightly different mindsets. I mean, we're sort of talking about this, and bringing those people together was good for the private sector people in some ways as well. But I wonder, is there more that could be done to systematise that kind of mentoring? This was very ad hoc, just depending on one person, knowing a whole bunch of people in your communities.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I sit on the regional board for business in the community, and that's what it is. I think I'm the only social entrepreneur on that panel. I've been for the last 10 years, and that probably tells you a bit about the challenge we've got in terms of trying to bridge the gap of connectivity between for private property enterprises and those that have a social outcome to it. I think that's part of the journey. We've still got to do that. It shouts a bit more about the examples that we see, like we do in the West Midlands, but I think that's important. I mean, one of the points I was raised earlier when we connected what we were saying was we have an access to finance group at our enterprise partnership. We pull together the regional banks and BCRS sit on that. It's only this last year that the voice of social investment beyond BCRS has been spoken to that place, and I think people's just fundamental understanding of what the value is of social enterprise and its role in the ecosystem of finance, it's not there yet. I think I've experienced the need for patient capital is so critical to that journey, and that you're not going to get the immediate or quick return that folks perhaps would want in the private sector. And maybe that's a role, I know Capital we champion that and others, that's what we perhaps need to magnify a bit more to our private sector colleagues to say, actually, you know, the return of it, yes, is financial, but on the triple line of it might be for you, it will be important as well. I think we're probably getting there in these lattices, but we're still way behind.
Probably got time for two more, maybe.
My name is David Smith. I'm the Chief Executive of Homelessness Charity working across the north east of England and London. We work with business wherever we can, wholeheartedly believe in that. However, we've also run a couple of social investment bonds, and I just wonder what you'd say to the charge that it can skew the outcomes, the marketisation of it, and the motivations can be skewed. That certainly has been our experience, to the extent that it's not always necessarily the best thing that's for the person at the end, the end user, the person they're seeking to serve, so the person that's homeless. I'm just interested in, particularly things like payment time results.
Yes. Yeah, I think my view, I've looked at a lot of these, we've been involved in a lot of these projects, and it can be done well, it can be done badly, like most things. And that sort of payment for outcomes by results kind of model really works best when it's pretty clear what outcomes you're aiming at and they're reasonably measurable, and that's true in some cases and not others. And a lot of it's about, I think, we sometimes try to use those models for things that are too complex, and then you get in all sorts of trouble because you're trying to trip over different things you're measuring or not measuring. So where I've seen it work best is where actually things are not too long term and the outcomes are pretty clear, and you're not trying to do something that's too complicated. So like any model, there's things that work, things that don't. We recently published a report on 10 years of that approach, looking across all the 1/3 across the country, which shows a lot of very positive outcomes, but equally some learnings about things along the way haven't worked so well. So it can work, but I certainly wouldn't claim it's perfect for everything.
The payment by results, there are two different aspects to this. When I was at the DWP, we set up a back-to-work program for the long-term unemployed, called the Work Program at the time. A few teething issues to begin with, like all these things, but we tidied up the management. We had two competing employment companies in every area, so on the contract. That worked in the end because what we used was the leverage of people coming off benefits to pay them the money that they needed as a result of that, and it was so successful, actually ultimately got rid of long-term unemployment to the point there wasn't enough money in the program anymore, so we shut it down. I'm sad the government didn't use it again, but it was definitely one way of making sure that this tidies them up into a focus on what their job was to do, and they were checked every week about where they were against their results and what they were expected to do. So payment by results can increase the discipline internal to the process, because people very quickly, if you're not careful, can drift from the original purpose to add things into things. It's very easy for governments, civil servants, local government, to start on a project that has a proven result, results for it. But very quickly, others further down the chain who don't necessarily completely buy into what was going on start adding stuff and taking stuff out of what they're trying to do. And so the idea of it is to stop them skewing it just by osmosis, as it were, because they want to do something else. So that's the point about payment results. In terms of the bonds, when we set up the first trials of them, when I was using that money from the DWP, I did feel you needed it in there. At first I didn't think so, but then I looked back at, there's another organisation in America, the Institute of Public Policy Research, and what they did in their area was very tight indeed. They talked about, at every turn, all the way down the chain, if any modification is made to the programme, you lose the money. And that had a very, very tight effect on what was delivered in the end, all the way down the chain. So there was no adds, there were no subtracts. You delivered what was originally invested in, and you measured it all the way down where you were meant to be. So I am a believer in it. I take your point, if you're not careful, something really useful that you could do doesn't get done because you don't want to do it. But in a way, that's when you come back, you actually argue that this might improve the way it runs, but that's a separate argument. My point is, if you don't do that quite often, I've seen it time and time again, the programs just drift off, and then suddenly nobody quite remembers what they were meant for, and they get shut, and they didn't achieve it. So it is a narrow process, I know, but it is kind of, the private sector does this a lot. The difference is, they will look at stuff again and again and ask themselves the question, can I make it better? But until you've reached the stage of knowing how this works, I think in the short term you have to stick with the payment by results. But I get your point. The smart guy comes up with something and says, nope, can't do that, because it's not in the programme. So, yeah, I get it.
I think that's all we've got time for. Start the round of time for questions are there. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again for our panelists for a very, very interesting discussion.